Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Star Citizen Live. I'm your host, Jared Huckabee, and you're here with me in my living room as we host another weekly episode of our Q&A series. Joining us on the show this week are two people I'm very fond of, and Dave Haddock. It's the members of our narrative team. Let me go ahead and bring them on here. He goes, hi, guys. How you doing?
Hello.
Oh, hello.
And
one
we
day,
have
Jared, this beef will die, but I don't know when.
Well, we've lost all saturation for this week's show.
Man, I just gotta say, this is so much more pleasant not being in the same room with you, Jared. I'm
struck by how true that is. I was like, man, it's just, yeah. For anybody who doesn't know who you are or what you do, let's just start with some intros and explain why we've lost all saturation. We'll start with you, Dave Haddock.
I'm Dave Haddock. I'm the narrative director over here at Cloud Imperium Games.
And why are you in black and white?
Well, funny enough, it was actually not something that we originated, because we get asked about this a lot. One of our designers, Johnny Gisavius, was actually the first one who did it, and Will and I were struck by how cool it looked, and so we just started doing it. And then he stopped, and we just kept it going. And also on my laptop, like it's a baked-in setting now, so I can't change it. Plus I like film noir, so.
All right. Also, the teams here is trying to adjust when you move back left and right.
Oh.
It's trying to adjust your camera. So, yeah. Although when you try to do it on purpose, it doesn't do it. Strangely enough.
Awesome.
Adam.
Yes, sir.
Let's go from left to right. Adam, who are you and what do you do for Star Citizen?
Who are you?
Who am I? That's a good question. I ask myself that every day. Adam Wieser. I am the writer. I work with Dave and Will on implementing lore and everything into the game. And I just live in black and white, so this is just my existence.
I do appreciate you dressing up for the show this week.
Absolutely. It's the most dressed up I've been in a while, so I figured might as well celebrate being with some people for a bit.
And last but certainly not least, Will, tell us who you are and what you do for Star Citizen.
Hi, I'm Will Weissbaum, and I'm the lead writer, and I do most of what Dave and Adam do, but different.
But backwards and wearing heels? So I thought where you were going with that.
Oh.
All right, so we have just some of the members of our narrative team here with us on the show this week, and as usual, we put a thread up on Spectrum, which is our communication platform available on robertspaceindustries.com, and allowed folks to submit questions that they wanted to see addressed by our narrative team, and then vote up which ones they wanted to see addressed most. We'll go start going through some of those. We will also take questions live through the Twitch chat if you're watching us live on Twitch. If you're viewing this later on YouTube, thanks for watching. But
So
we do take the questions live. I'm sorry.
Today's episode was supposed to focus on ship deliverables, and I don't see many questions in the thread about that. So we can just scroll down past these lore questions and see if we can find something. Just kidding, everyone. These are great questions. Really, thank you for taking the time to post these.
It's going to be one of those shows. But Will does touch on a good point, though. These are members of our narrative team. So questions that would be appropriate for this week's show would be related to story, related to lore, related to the background of elements from the Star Citizen and Squadron 42's universe. I know everybody is anxious about 3.9 and where 3.9 is. The only thing I can tell you about 3.9 is that obviously our folks are working as diligently as ever on it, and we definitely want it in your hands just as much as you guys do.
Yeah.
So I have no other update other than that. Other than when we feel it's ready, it'll be out there.
We were just in it playing right before we hopped onto this call.
Don't rub it into people.
I'm just saying we're doing work.
All right.
Squashing the bugs.
Right off the bat, the number one question from the Spectrum chat was about the Galactapedia, which we debuted at CitizenCon last year. It read, with the release of the Galactapedia on the web, nice job, by the way. I didn't add that. That was them. Is there any thought as to how long it will be before we have an app in the game where we can look things up in the database without leaving the game client, or will this even be possible?
Yeah, I mean that's the goal. Is that we ultimately want it to be incorporated and exist in the game as well as on the website. You know, I mean we're actually having conversations to try and figure out kind of the best way. Because again, like once we start to get it in game, it obviously loops in a whole lot other aspect of development. Because right now we were just doing it as a web thing. But the beautiful thing was that the way that Sherry and Turbulent kind of built it was that it was designed kind of like the star map, with that same kind of language. So hopefully the step to transition it from website to game was already thought of. So hopefully it'll be a lot easier to do. But yeah, we're trying to figure out a timeline and when we can get resources kind of dedicated to transitioning it over. But it's definitely on the forefront.
And it's, actively being discussed and worked on. So while we don't have a set timeline yet, it's something that we really want. And for those who haven't checked out the Galactapedia in a while since it launched back in CitizenCon, Sherry has been working diligently on adding updates really regularly. So there's a ton of new content there for you to check out. There's a series of Spectrum posts outlining all the new stuff that's in there. So really, really cool stuff.
Check it out.
And then, of course, you can find a lot of first-run Galactapedia articles in Jump Point magazine, which is the monthly subscriber magazine.
Those are definitely our more deep dive Galactapedia articles. Like right now, a lot of the ones on the site are the shorter blurbs because, as Sherry outlined, we're going for breadth in this first pass rather than depth. But the ones in Jump Point are those really deep dives that we're hoping to get more and more of as time goes on.
Yeah, the hope is that the Jump Point format is like what our final, quote unquote, article length will be, and once we kind of start to dig in deeper.
All right. From the live chat here, will we ever get to read everything I learned about dogfighting I learned from my fish tank in its entirety?
I don't know about its entirety. It's something we have talked about with the props team before, and something that we have Adam kind of thinking about this quarter is how do we do more of that kind of fun, interactive, being able to read stories in the game. Most likely we will go along with the direction that a lot of games take of where we have a select excerpt for you to peruse rather than a full 300-page fish tank book. But that is kind of the hope and direction that we're going into. Like we've seen fun tests where you can actually hold up the prop and look at the contents inside the book stuff, which is pretty neat, or whether you're going to be able to download it to your Moby Glass and read it there.
Yeah, you already know how many pages are in it.
Yeah, I mean, one of our long-term dreams that we've talked about, and then it's all coming down very long-term, is the idea of once we have the Star Citizen app as well, that when you get reading content that you find in the verse, you'll be able to then later on read it offline on your phone or tablet or whatever, and enjoy it that way. So rather than sitting in the game reading those pages, you can take it offline. So that would be fun.
Follow-up question: if you could make any one of those books that we've seen in game and flesh it out, what would be the first one? If you had the resources and you had the time, what would be the first one?
Ooh, I got to go to back to the everything I learned about dogfighting and learn from a fish tank. I'd make that a children's book, because then you could do it kind of like do it mainly through illustrations and kind of use water and space and stuff like that. And we could make a full book that way without it being too intensive. Be a fun little starter's guide to how to kill people with your spaceship for all the kids out there.
That was more than I expected.
I would probably actually go with the full length, fully illustrated gift for Baba. That would be mine. Just because I like pictures.
Oh yeah.
We have we added with the 890 Jump these kind of activist books by Lawrence Gito that I think would be really funny to write these very angry. It's this author that just writes a lot of very aggressive political books like Silent Voices and Easy Mark and stuff like that. So I kind of want to put on that.
Is he the one who wrote Squadron. Was it 42 Lies?
I can check that. I think so. Yeah, that was a funny title.
Anyway,
that he made a guest appearance on to
Plain Truth.
Probably Plain Truth, yeah.
Next question from the thread while Will looks that up. In 3.7, there were cryptic messages broadcast around the verse in the PU. What happened to those, and what is the lore behind those messages? Are we ready to reveal that yet?
Well, there was lore behind it.
They're still kind of cryptic for a reason. I'll say that, and hopefully we'll have more for that soon.
All right, so the thing that those messages are leading up to hasn't happened. Nobody's missed it yet.
No.
Okay. All right, so what is the current status of Earth in 2950?
It's a planet.
Is it?
I believe so.
Still?
I think so, as far as I know, unless we're losing mass. Yeah, I mean, there was funny enough. Like, I mean, I think Earth is sort of stabilized a bit. It had a real rough go of it early on, in sort of weirdly enough, sort of between now and the successful terraforming of Mars. That was when Earth sort of hit a really, really bad patch because it had a real serious overcrowding problem and water wars and stuff like that. And so basically it was like the terraforming, being able to kind of, that's what drove the need to develop this terraforming technology. And then once that kind of succeeded, and we were able to kind of spread out onto Mars and then spread out from there, it sort of like deflated the problem on Earth. So I think at this point it's probably been sort of okay. Like, it's probably not as inhabited as it probably used to be.
People are just preferring Terra.
Well,
whoa,
oh damn! Whoa. Going there, Jared. Shots fired.
Hey, Terra's the planet that humanity chose.
That's fair. But yeah, I mean, again, like obviously once we can get the kind of the art team to kind of focus the Eye of Sauron on that on Earth, we'll kind of dig in a little bit deeper into it and be able to kind of really kind of get nuts and bolts of like, no, really, what is Earth like? But again, from a lore perspective, like, it's still kind of the ancestral home of humanity. So there's a lot of like, historical ties, that sort of notion of like who we were and where we came from and blah, 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 to kind of keep hammering that point of like the difference between Earth and Terra, where Terra is all about looking towards the future. Earth would probably be more about looking towards the past, which again kind of solidifies that argument about why people, would stay with Earth or go with Terra and stuff like that. So I feel like we'll probably try to kind of hammer that point, or at least kind of give subtle nods to it, just to kind of heighten that disparity between the two places.
Like, we have that fun concept art that we released of like Manchester in the year, it was like 2945 or something like that. That was kind of a cool indication of one direction we might go, of that kind of mix of like preserving the history and emphasizing it, as well as like the new high rises and stuff. But I think we envision like a prettier, cleaner Earth than what we have now, that they've been able to wrangle that after the diaspora and with all the new future tech, as Dave said. So
yeah, I mean, one of the things that we called that was kind of called out because Lost Generation actually, Tanya went to Earth, but was this sort of idea that like a lot of the older buildings were sort of encased in these sort of shells to protect them from elements and from ships ramming into them, and so like there is a sort of weird museum quality to it, I think, which again would be kind of fun to play with once we get there.
So chat chat has a number of people.
Oh, good. People are watching.
Putting out.
That's great.
Commenting about Antoine Lillard, and that's a reference to the ongoing elections for.
Yeah, that is one of our
Imperator.
Imperator candidates.
But there seems to be a lot of support for Antoine in the Twitch chat right now. Adam, I know in the last 2 issues of Jump Point we've had a breakdown of our candidates for Imperator. If you guys have any particular favorites? Is there anybody that you're pulling for? like if you had to vote today, who would you vote for?
Just to refresh my, Lillard's the one who wants to dismantle the UEE, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
I believe so. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Put power back into the system's hands. Blah, blah, blah. Okay.
Yep. Exactly.
There's
Basically.
so many people. So many people to keep track of.
Yeah. Empower the systems. Kind of like pull apart the UEE as one kind of governing body overall system, and let local government kind of rule all. To pick one, that's tough, because I've had to go through and basically write all 10 kind of perspectives. So to be able to do that, I had to get into their headspace and try to understand what would motivate them. Or I believe was it Leilani? I think that would be my favorite. Let me double check really quick. Yeah, the science first one was.
Oh man, you pick mine.
Was always sorry to jump on that, but
this is me not as like a narrative writer. This is me as like a human voter. That she would probably be who I would steer towards, so that's not indicative of who I want as the lead writer to win.
You make a good point. It's who you would want as a citizen is not necessarily who you would want that would unlock the biggest narrative potential, as a writer. So Will as a person could want one person, but Will as a writer who wants to see where the universe would go, could want somebody else.
So why do you like her, Adam? I jumped on you. I'm sorry.
Oh no, all good. I think it was, I don't know. I think just for some reason when I started to kind of dig into what motivated her to lead her down this path of like let's trust science, let's open it up, and kind of like, both my parents are educators and teachers, so I'm a big believer in that too. So there was just something about her as a young child, and she comes from what is it? Was it Oya?
Yeah.
Yeah, so she comes from Oya, which is basically a UEE system that has this Xi'an settlement that's in the middle of it. It's a historical Xi'an settlement. It's been there for generations. So it's this one chunk of the UEE, which technically has like Xi'an occupation in it. So she grew up kind of with this mixing of human and Xi'an cultures. And I thought that was really cool to be able to give her this perspective of wider science and greater understanding of different things. And like, the more you learn about something, the more you kind of can see other perspectives and grow and learn. So there was just something really uplifting about that. And since so much of politics can get kind of like nasty and dirty, it was fun to kind of like be able to get in the mind and perspective of someone that was trying to raise people up and try to fight for a better future rather than just fight for political power or greed or purposes like that. So
I find her stance on AI unsettling. I'm just going to say it.
Yeah, no, that definitely is another hot button issue too. We've
gone down that path so many times before, and it has never led to anything good. So that's all I'm saying.
Now, you mentioned AI, and that's actually the topic of our next question. This comes up every once in a while because every time we do one of these shows, we gain thousands and thousands of people between them, so they don't know the history here.
It's been a couple months since we've said it, so yeah.
Why aren't there any robots or sophisticated AIs in the Star Citizen universe?
So yeah, that's two different questions.
Yeah,
we got robots. There got drones.
There are robots. Yeah, I guess it's. I mean, this is one of those points. I mean, to get in the larger question about just the AI thing, is
synthetic life, I suppose.
Yeah, it's not a like scientific reason or anything like that. It's again purely the fact of like when setting out to create something like this, like what is the world that you want to make? I mean, again, like with any large universe, people sit there and go, what are their influences and what are their personal tastes and stuff like that. Like, and from the earliest conversations with Chris was, he wanted it to feel like a very tactile world that, he wants people to be out doing stuff, and, you get to be the baddest pilot in the universe because you are that cool. And, so it was a stylistic, artistic, creative choice to kind of say, like, didn't want AI kind of, because again, obviously, AI developed will be the, most efficient, best pilots, crack shots. If you read like the Ian Banks stuff, where it's like armies are waging war across galaxies and just firing shots and just destroying each other and stuff like that. Like that's a very specific type of sci-fi space opera type thing. And Chris again wanted it to feel more gritty, people-driven type thing. So it was really just, that was the thing. And then we had to come up with a reason to back explain it. So it was like, I don't like the original statement of, I'm not really a fan of AI or sort of synthetic humanoids, just because of A, B, and C. And then, so I was like, okay, so we could pepper all of these incidents that happened throughout history where attempts to make AI have gone horrifically wrong. And every 20 or 30 or 50 years, someone's like, oh, I think I can finally crack it. And then that goes wrong. And everyone goes, you know what, this AI thing is just not really our bag. So that's the core of it. Again, like it's a break from sort of, a forward projection of like, what will life actually be like in, the 30th century and stuff like that. Like, this is just, how did we want to tell the game?
So we had these horrible, like, kind of experience with people developing, trying to get AI there that created these laws that we live under. But like, there are those fears that so much of our technology in the game is connected through the comms and spectrum, and the idea of that if you have an artificial intelligence, the danger that it would pose to our way of life, potentially, not even if they are malicious and mean to harm us, but there is that threat there. Like, that modern thinkers always warn us about, like, oh, the next big threat's going to be AI. So you have those people still existing in lore who are like, we can get most of what we need done with our advanced computers with really smart, intelligent computers without them being able to think freely for themselves. Like we've just set the mark somewhere else of what.
Yeah, they have the capacity, I think, of like, I think it's called dumb AI, where it's like the systems are smart and can do really, really cool stuff, but they need that input. You tell them to do it, and then they can do really, really cool stuff. But it still needs that human aspect, because again, like, if you want to be the coolest pilot or the best hauler, like, it's about getting out there and doing it, not just kind of chilling out in your penthouse and, sitting on tablets and sending out an army of hauling drones.
Which, it's going to be interesting when we get that gameplay in, because we do have these cargo moving drones. We do have the idea of combat drones. So people, I think, are going to get a little bit more of that fictional flavor that they're looking for once we get these drones running in game and have the different kinds of them, so that you will have your robot helpers coming along with you and doing stuff for you. And when you're in the city, you'll start seeing them moving around and stuff. And that'll be like another level, I think, that we're striving for, and kind of that science fiction fun that we're not at yet.
Yeah. Okay. Switching gears here from the live chat. Where does the meat for the burgers and hot dogs come from in the universe? Are there space cows? Is there different kinds of meat?
There is different kinds of meat. Some of it, a lot of the cheaper stuff, you'll see like synthetically grown meat, still technically meat. And some of it, there is actual livestock still being raised. We have land, and grain is not so much of an issue anymore. It is a little more luxury because you have to fly it around and ship it and all that cost involved. But we do have space, literally whole planets to do this stuff on. So yeah, it comes from a variety of sources, and some like you'll see in some of the descriptions, some things are just protein, which is, they give you the nutrients you need, but it's not trying to simulate any kind of flesh eating experience. So
is Whammers real meat, or is it synthetic?
Whammers is synthetic. They're
That's
beef.
Disappointing to hear.
It's beef, but it's not from an animal.
As far as space cows go, I'm gonna tell people to stay tuned. you'll learn more about space cows.
What is that?
In
Were
the
you
future.
foreshadowing?
I am foreshadowing. We'll see how much trouble I get into. How do you imagine? A lot of the questions. I'm going
Just
to
close
rephrase
my
those
eyes and
questions.
dream.
One of the questions that comes in, it comes in a number of forms here, so I'm just going to kind of synthesize all of them. How do you imagine players will be able to affect the lore of Star Citizen? We've talked a little bit about them being able to participate in the elections for Imperator in some way or another. But as far as, including that, but as far as just playing the day-to-day Star Citizen, how are you how much influence are you envisioning players would have in affecting your lore?
I mean, again, like ever since the the earliest days of this, I mean, the example that always gets brought up is the Dread Pirate Roberts thing of, if you're the pilot who kills the notorious Dread Pirate Roberts, like, that goes down in history as you were the person that tagged that person. I mean, for me, it's one of those things that's like, we're not really creating any kind of, you're the one type scenario here. So you are just one of a couple billion person universe. So I think it would be one of those things that we're trying to figure out ways that the players can affect the flow of the lore, but it has to be something of note and significance. I mean, we've talked in the past about jump points, discovering jump points, even sort of trying to figure out ways that we can add gameplay to existing jump points as well. So there's additional stuff for explorers to kind of try to do in the meantime about can we make routes more efficient, that the sort of, tried and true path is stable and but are there more potentially, can we do unstable routes that you can discover that can show up and then disappear, stuff like that? We're trying to figure out a bunch of different ways. Obviously, all of this needs to go by design and and test it out to see if it's fun. But yeah, I mean, trying to figure out ways to have the players affect the world around them has always been sort of a thing on the forefront.
I mean, we saw Tony and Jake's presentation at CitizenCon with the new economy stuff, and that's something that we as the narrative team are very excited about that coming online, is because that's going to be another tool, hopefully, that we'll be able to tie into, as well as from what the players are doing perspective. So again, the idea that there are small percentages of the population, but if enough players, big enough of an org starts interrupting trade to an area, we hope in real time to be able to have that area affected in it, so that you might see a city get dirtier and the crime rates start going up and security start coming in. And that's one way that I see the players kind of interacting with narrative and design on the same level of seeing the world change slowly because of what they're doing.
And conversely with that same example, players an area starts getting affected and starts kind of going down economically, and they start putting out a bunch of ads for hired guns to come in and kind of help restore security, and players come in and fulfill those roles, then they feel responsible for bringing the economy back up because they've kicked out the outlaws and swept the area clear and stuff like that. So yeah, there's a bunch of different ways, basically.
And even on a simpler level, we love your input on Spectrum, on everywhere. We read a lot more than we're able to comment on, unfortunately. Reading is faster, and commenting, because we have to be very careful with how we respond to make sure that it's coded, it takes a little bit longer, so we're not as active with that as I would like to be. Apologies. But I love hearing it and hearing your thoughts, and it does influence what we do. A lot, like this election stuff, we're reading everything that you guys are saying on it, and it's really fun, and it makes us think of stuff. So that's great. Keep doing that, please.
Yeah, I was going to be part of my follow up there. We were talking about systemic ways in which players could maybe affect the lore, but what about their effect on just you personally? Can you think of an example? We've been at this for a little while now, where the things that you've seen from players, either their actions in the game, or I guess specifically their actions in the game, or how they've reacted to something, has influenced the creation of lore on your behalf?
Benny Henge is a great example. Like, that was player inspired from all the Big Benny vending machine collection, and then we wanted to do kind of an homage to that, and we were thinking, like, we always try to really bury stuff in the narrative of the game, so it wasn't just building this fun site that was cool. We had to think of why someone would do this, and so it came up with a story to do spoilers for people who haven't discovered it, of this eccentric artist who was trying to make a name for themselves, who met a slightly tragic end out there. And so that was all inspired by this kind of back and forth conversation between the players, the game, and the designers. And so that was pretty neat.
I mean, there's another good one too. This was years ago, but I remember the I think it was the Consolidated Outlands. There was we came out with an ad, and there was an org that had a logo that was very similar to the Consolidated Outlands one. So they tried to send a cease and desist letter to Consolidated Outlands, and so we organized a response, and we shut down their org, or said that they were unlocked because they were under investigation from the advocacy for libel, and it was just a little fun back and forth thing. But that stuff is always, I don't know, I always get a kick out of doing stuff like that. I
imagine Jumptown could be
Jumptown,
could be seen as a direct response to a lot of player input.
Yeah, that was I mean, that was fascinating to see just how that all came together, and how people were there were people that were trying to game the system, and people trying to just do runs, and it created a whole criminal infrastructure that was just...
and we literally folded that back into the lore also, regarding Crusader getting into trouble for basically playing with their crime stats and basically saying crime was lower than it was there. And so the head of Crusader had to go in front of a Senate subcommittee and testify about them kind of improving their security. And one of the points that came back around was like, oh, well, what about this place called Jumptown, which is a very notorious kind of like drug running kind of like location in your system that you're doing nothing about. We know about it here, but so it was because of the popularity of Jumptown and people sharing the information and doing the runs there that we then folded it back in to where it became a part of the lore itself, that it had become so notorious it was known in the Senate and throughout the universe.
Yeah, that's one of the things I really like about Star Citizen, and there are quite a few things, but that, you know, while we're waiting for more systemic things, like Dave was talking about, the discovery of jump points and stuff, that you guys specifically are still looking for avenues where the community can affect the story of Star Citizen, and incorporating those bits where they're natural and where they don't conflict with the other things you're trying to do, and I appreciate that at the very least.
Well, I mean, it's one of those things that's like, you know, we only come up with so much. Like, it's nice to getting that sort of outside influence is great, because you can just get to react to it and just go, that's awesome. Like, we wouldn't have thought of that. Like, and incorporate it in there.
Question from the live chat: will there be a continuing narrative in the PU to give the feeling of time and history passing in the verse?
That's the hope. I mean, we've sort of been outlining stories as far as like, and you're seeing some of it. I mean, again, the thing Adam was referring to about the crime situation outside of Crusader becoming an issue, and them not being kind of well equipped to handle it is sort of one of the storylines that we have developing in Stanton. So the hope is that, because, you know, like Squadron 42 is a much more, you know, blinders on single player experience, cinematic adventure type thing. You know, we're trying to figure out ways to still have that kind of fun, but obviously in a larger multiplayer arena.
Yeah, I think a lot of our larger plots that we introduce, and you can see some of these in the election with these like hot button topics of how should security work? Should it be more of these government run tight organizations, or should we offload it more to private security? Are topics that we want explored through gameplay, that we have a bunch of ideas for what the different outcomes could do. So like, the Karen Civil War, Synth World, all these high level topics. It's not that we have one set narrative where we know how it ends. We're hoping to put these things into the universe and see how the players interact with them and see which way that goes from that, and then have it. And hopefully these storylines will develop and then end, and then we'll introduce more ones. And so on that way, you'll feel the passage of time that will do.
And also too, like having the sort of the multiple tiers of levels, like of stories, like having the larger storyline about like the the sort of Vandal war effort and what does that mean, and then having just to kind of take our existing the PU as it stands, like there's this sort of larger storyline going on with like obviously the upcoming election, there's the Vandal military conflict, all that stuff. But then within Stanton, we're having this sort of question of, they're a UEE system, but they're not a recognized one because they're all corporate owned. So the corporations are trying to figure out how to rally crime within their system, because Crusader's obviously not doing a great job, and that's screwing it up for everybody else. But then we'll have stories that are on a more local level. Like Lorville has its own storyline about activists versus Hurston Dynamics, fair pay and not toxic work conditions type thing. So this and then hopefully we'll get interpersonal storylines where you come across characters who have something at stake that they really care about, that you can get involved with. So hopefully between all of those levels of stories that are all kind of moving in different paces, obviously, but we get a sense of a interwoven universe.
Yeah, and then hopefully as well down the road, we're going to start introducing more kind of special events, which are these bigger story moments where it'll have some kind of effect at the end of it, that'll change things a little bit. But those will be more special case, because a lot of this times, like the Hurston versus the Hurston activist, we want that to carry on for a long time and play with that storyline, so that we're not just introducing a bunch of content and then having it go away after one quarter or something like that, because it's just too expensive development wise in terms of time and development resources. So by having these long brewing storylines that lead up to a big event, that we then can, have an outcome happen. So. Right.
Now, you mentioned Synth World, and that's a sore subject for me. I'll come back to Synth World. But you mentioned the story about Hurston, about the Hurston family. There are several stories that go on for each of our planets, but one of the principal stories for Hurston is, like you said, the Hurston family versus the activists. What would you say is the principal story for ArcCorp? Like that, does ArcCorp have a story like that?
Yes, it's not as defined because they're much more. It's much more of a weird melting pot, because they they bring in a bunch of different companies, and But yes, there's a sort of a crime element going on there that Twitch is a part of.
Like Stanton as a whole is like all these different takes on capitalism, and we've talked about this before a little bit, but like ArcCorp is like the free market gone completely wild is kind of the idea of that. And so like we hinted at in one of our short stories, the idea that people kind of can get stuck there because there's so many people going there for work, and that it's a hiring market, so people arrive there, can't find work, and kind of get stuck on the planet because they can't get anything other than like low-paying subsistence jobs, and kind of end up there destitute a bit. Even though they're working, they can't afford to get back out, which is a different kind of entrapment than Hurston's kind of tight contracts. And so like trying to play around with the idea of that, and like you have Microtech, which we just dropped down. We're starting to hint at this, is like they're a company that means well, but this kind of what happens when they don't have to follow a lot of the making their own laws from this corporate entity. And so you start seeing this like party scene developing and these kind of more liberal attitudes and going on, and what's going to come out of that. and versus Crusader, which is a company that really tries to care and take care of people, but maybe they're not equipped to be a government. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
That was actually my next question. How does we talked about Hearst and we talked about ArcCorp. Let's talk about Microtech before we move on to Crusader. What's the key story going on with Microtech? New Babbage.
I mean, it's basically, again, like, Microtech obviously is the developer of Moby-Glass. We sort of have it on this sort of the sort of water cooler description of New Babbage was sort of Silicon Valley / Cabo or Vail, because it's basically this very weird mishmash of, it's a lot of like tech developers, and they really are trying to foster like innovation and bringing smart minds together and stuff like that. And this is, I think, something we discussed when Will and I were walking through halls carrying lattes. Sort of the idea that to them, like, recreational drugs is not good. People abuse it, but like, people need to blow off steam and party a little bit, like they'll kind of turn a blind eye to it. But intellectual property theft on Microtech is like sacrosanct. Like, you don't do that. So yeah, they're kind of like what Will was saying. Like, they have sort of fallen in this sort of interesting spin on capitalism or corporate culture of, they're very lax with a lot of things, but they're super hardcore with other things. So how does that exactly play out as far as for their employees? And so obviously with there's a huge market for corporate espionage. So that would be sort of a big thing we get to play with there, of like, because again, the stakes are so high that, people are looking to, but there's a lot of like really cutting edge development going on. There's a lot of interest in that next $1 billion idea. And if people are willing to shed some blood to get the next, hot app.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's almost like corporate campus culture taken to like a planetary level. So it's almost the inverse of Hurston, where they try to lock you into these contracts where you can't leave. In Microtech, it's like Brave New World style, where they're like, well, let's give you all this good stuff so you don't want to leave. And we'll put you in these domes, and you'll have all these kind of like yoga services and rock climbing walls and things like that. So it's just a different way to try to entice people to want to stay there and just stay working and active all the time and essentially not leave the planet. So it's
it's kind of a
interesting.
Weird golden handcuff type thing. You get all of these opportunities, and they're like, well, why do you need to take a vacation? Any place you want to go is right here. And so they get to kind of trap them into working a little bit longer. It's not that insidious, but like, it's that type of.
All right, so we've got ArcCorp, where it's just the free market. Everybody fends for yourself, run amok. We've got Hurston, where it's a rather oppressive contract, indentured servitude, maybe, if you will. At least that's my interpretation. Microtech, where we're trying to wow you with enthusiasm and look how much we do for you. You want to work for us and protect our interests. What's Crusader?
The nice guys who are probably too nice. The Crusader, and also again too, I mean, just to say, like, we're trying to not have it be ultra pessimistic. I mean, I'm pessimistic by nature, so that's just going to happen. But just that idea of like, with Crusader, like, we actually wanted them to be genuinely like, we care about their workers and want to make a good environment for them and a safe place and a place for their families and a place that they're proud to work at, and know that their sort of hires up really take care of them. But the double-edged sword to that is that, are they able to make the hard calls, to make decisions that aren't nice, if as far, and so that's where the sort of their willingness to sort of empathize almost becoming a detriment to them, because with their outlaws, they're like, well, I mean, they're clearly desperate and they're having problems and stuff like that, but they're not. So it's kind of staying their hand a little bit as far as like being able to really clamp down on them from a security standpoint, which unfortunately, like a lot of these outlaws are going to take advantage of and capitalize on. So So that was sort of the fun twist.
Yeah, that they wanted like all these tourism to come because, building like the Starliner and stuff like that. They were trying to attract people. And then with those tourists came people looking to prey off those tourists. And then the question is there security up to snuff? And they're having a hard time of dealing with this. And it's just that thing that we're seeing of running a company is not the same thing as running a government. And they're not equatable. And that's what Crusader is learning in real time and trying to get on top of. So.
Yeah, and one of the core principles of Crusader has always been to donate a percentage of their profits to kind of like nonprofit organizations or to, so to not basically, so they have all this money that they've also dedicated to other causes, which is now becoming a kind of something for them to consider. Do you stop doing that to increase security? Do you give up one of your core principles as a way to kind of protect yourself? But if you don't protect yourself, does the entire thing just go away and then you have no money to give away? So they're kind of stuck in this this catch-22 to a certain degree.
Twitch chat has already equated Crusader to Space Canadians.
No comment.
But it would seem on the surface that Microtech. Both Microtech and Crusader care about their people. Is the implication here that maybe Crusader's a bit more truthful in that stance, and maybe Microtech's a bit more disingenuous?
Not disingenuous. I think Microtech has read a report that says you get better productivity. Like they noticed a 0.3 increase if people do exercise every 2 hours in their creative function. And so they provided that, people do better if they have healthy food to eat. So they made sure that's there, Yeah. And that's kind of how they approach this. They did city planning. They looked at reports. They decided that these colors are best to improve your mood. And that's why this stuff's this color, like that kind of thing. So
that's, again, like you'll, not to rub it in, but there's some really fun aspects of when you walk around New Babbage. Some of the announcements in the shopping areas are sort of part of that self-help. They hired a self-help guru basically to kind of give you bits of inspiration to take with you on your day that are really fantastic.
And just to round out our trip through the stand system, it's not a planet, but let's talk about Grimhex. What are the people who run Grimhex? What are the people who run Grimhex like?
Well, they're just trying to keep their heads down. I mean, again, it used to be a sort of a legitimate housing exchange, which is where the hex comes from. So it was basically like staging area for local miners to kind of rent rooms and dock their ship, and basically like they can go out and they can mine an asteroid and then have a place. They don't have to travel to another system to go home. They can kind of dock pretty close. But the station shut down, and but was not uninhabited. So basically, people started to either stuck around or move back in and started squatting there. And so it's a sort of an off the grid type establishment. And then the sort of new power was an outlaw pack known as the Nine Tails, basically moved in and kind of set up shop there. And so that's their basic haunt. So they're basically the security, obviously not, conventional police, but that's where that's their sort of headquarters for operations in the system. And so they're basically there kind of messing around and hitting Crusader really hard, and they're part of the probably one of the biggest thorns in their side at the moment.
Gotcha. Are there other functional hexes throughout the universe, throughout the galaxy?
That's the hope. That again, to kind of allow us to reuse assets, was the hope is that we create like kind of a standardized, housing station, and then this was just a sort of the dilapidated version. Right. Fingers crossed. I'm hoping that we see some more.
Yeah, just kind of like a more permanent setup for people that's not just renting easy habs at kind of an R&R station, that these like floating space apartments would be much more affordable than living planetside. And if you work in space doing like asteroid mining in a big belt that you would maybe want to live in one of these rather than, going down to a world and back up every time.
Yeah, that's sort of more long-term rental type thing rather than a nightly easy hab. You want a couple rooms to be able to walk through and stuff like that. But
And while it's not a permanent fixture in the Stanton system, it is visiting. Let's talk about Delamar a little bit. What's who runs Delamar? What's the story of Delamar?
Delamar, again, is supposed to be situated in the Nix system, which is an unclaimed system, and basically it was a refugee. Started off as sort of a refugee base. People who were trying to flee the fascist Messer regime went there to kind of try to set up their own society and community, and called themselves the People's Alliance. And so it's basically this sort of like it's kind of a similar thing to Crusader, actually, that they wanted to the goal was to set up this really egalitarian like society, and the Messers are evil and doing it all wrong, so we're going to do it right, and it's all going to be about people and celebrating each other and sharing and blah blah blah. But and not kind of cracking down on people and shutting down their ways of belief and stuff. But unfortunately, like that, there are people that are taking advantage of that freedom, which are a criminal element that are slowly kind of moving into using them as a shelter to hide from authorities. And so it puts the People's Alliance in sort of a precarious position, because they're like, well, like what I was saying earlier, like, we don't want to sacrifice our beliefs of like ratting out these people who are clearly a bad element. But at the same time, they're preying upon people and even people in our system. So they're not good. How do we reconcile those two?
Yeah, and basically they kind of reach this kind of imperfect balance where, as long as there's no crime actively in the station, they're willing to turn a blind eye to it. So like the criminals are keeping it kind of low key for now, and everyone's just kind of ignoring each other to maintain this truce. So we'll see if that breaks or bubbles up or something.
Yeah.
I thought we might get through the entire show without this question coming up, but with 10 minutes to spare, here it is. I see it now. How did ArcCorp Corporation manage to build and populate an entire megacity like Stan 3 in less than 85 years?
That
seems perfectly rational to me.
One of the things that's coming up with one of the future planet techs is, hopefully, like, it's still in discussion, if the city texture isn't going to cover the entirety of the planet. There is going to be areas that don't have the megacity. It's mostly covered, but it's not going to be as uniform as it is right now.
And we also, we shifted the date, right? Did we publish that?
Yeah, that's the 85 years.
Yeah, 85 is
85. Oh, that's right. It used to be much shorter.
Yeah, it used to be much shorter, and this person is still giving you crap about the 85.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
Now.
Again, a thing that we were trying to also say was sort of part of the handwavium of it was the idea that a lot of the planet is sort of, large swaths of, mostly flat kind of like factory stuff, or, that's sort
warehouses and stuff.
Warehouses and stuff that's kind of relatively easy to throw up. And also, our handwavium was that there drew a lot of inspiration from some of the Xi'an production worlds that are that sort of very, single focus type world allocation. So hopefully that they would have magic, space brushes that could just, spray down urban sprawl. But we haven't really gotten into that. But that was.
And then there's been discussion about the oceans on ArcCorp, and
that's what Will was saying. Is that hopefully we can get to a point where we can start to blend, because I think that was I can't remember if that was the issue.
Yeah, it's the biome blending that they're.
Yeah, that was the problem.
Because ArcCorp is built differently than every other planet.
Yeah, so it's easier to right now just slap a city over everything.
Yeah, every time the planet team releases a new round, I'm just blown away again. I keep thinking like, wow, like how can I get better than this? And then they show me. So the new stuff going in 3.9 is stunning. So
also from the live chat, how much space magic should we expect to see in Star Citizen? Are there any advanced learning or civilizations with heightened senses or innate abilities?
We try to stay a little more crunchy sci-fi than that. There's a few things that we've talked on that we're not going to get into now, but that kind of start dipping our toe into the more mysterious science stuff. Like we have our Gravlev technology where, like, you see on like the Xi'an spaceships where they have little floaty bits, and we kind of understand the science behind that, but it is heading that way, and so we don't plan on having like a whole team of like elite Esper like fighting forces or something coming out and mind controlling everyone or anything like that, so it's not on the cards right now.
Fair enough. When will Synth World ever be finished?
That is the question.
That's what every citizen wants to know. I'm paying taxes.
Yeah.
So this is something Dave and I were talking a bit about before, just to touch on, is that a lot of times we wanted to introduce these kind of cool stories into the lore, but we don't want them to resolve until people can experience them in the game. So it might be sometimes a little bit of time goes on without anything like major happening, and that's because we're kind of holding off a little bit narratively until we can resolve this stuff in game. So sure, we could write a story being like it's done or it failed, but we don't want to do that right now. Like that's going to be later on. Same thing with the like Karen Civil War.
Because then it gets to be kind of a thing where it's like, all right, well then it doesn't matter. Like, if we resolve the synth world before you get to actually kind of like hopefully go to Chronos system and see something about it, then it loses a lot of magic, because you hear about a cool story that happened that you kind of didn't get to experience. So it's just sort of like,
yeah, and that's another way for players to engage actively with the story. If a lot of players are bringing supplies to the synth world to help it be completed, then there's always a chance that maybe it kind of goes in the right direction. If people aren't taking it there because it's not worth it, then that might influence the story for why it fails. So
Dennis showed up in chat. He wants to be a space paladin. He's asking him to add space paladins.
Yeah, just tell him to introduce everyone he meets in game that he's a space paladin,
and just shake his head at people who are gambling.
Dennis is our IT guy from the LA studio.
What's up, Dennis?
Hi, Dennis.
Hey, Dennis.
I guess following up on the question about the space magic stuff, what about genetic modification? Do you what's the UEE stance on genetic manipulation?
I mean, we had sort of I kind of covered that a little bit in the writer's guide. I mean, I'd sort of gone with the kind of the Gattaca approach, where it was that sort of initial, like, they kind of cut down on a lot of pre-existing like conditions that they could. So there's a certain aspect of genetic modification. I mean, again, it doesn't feel like that's our universe in a weird way, because we don't want it to get like super weird where it's, but again, I don't know, it's still kind of up in the air.
It's fairly limited. They found out, like, I think we're going kind of the problems that arise from too much genetic modification is that generationally you start seeing these issues spring up, which they quickly identified that if you start messing with DNA too much, either you end up with homogeny, which is a big issue for the human race as a whole, or you start getting these unintended side effects a couple generations in. So I think it ended up being a little more controlled and limited to, making sure that these diseases were kind of wiped out or nipped in the bud. I think a lot of times you end up having later in life gene stuff happen, or like, lab grown body parts or organs and stuff like that coming into the road, and that's where medical science kind of headed, versus trying to build the perfect human in a lab through genetic modification.
Right. Awesome. We're just about done. Last question
Oh,
is
no.
about the last
Oh.
question's about the elections. I know we're not ready to reveal our full plans and whatnot yet. It's still in the beginning of April, but one of the questions that's come up throughout the entire show and it was voted up on the thread was, are we going to let people actually influence who becomes the next Imperator?
Yeah, that's the hope. I mean, we're still working out exactly how we want to structure it. But yeah, I mean, I think it'd be fun.
And what if they pick Antoine?
Well, then we have to figure out how to deal with that, or we assassinate him. A space piano falls on his head. And,
All right. Well, guys, thank you so much for hanging out with me on a Friday morning.
Yeah.
I do appreciate you taking the time. It's these are some of the only times I get to hang out and chat with people now that we're all dealing with the work from home stuff. So
Yeah, I hope
for me
everyone
at
out
least.
there is safe and well. And
Yeah.
thanks
Stay
for
healthy.
hanging out with us as a distraction. Much appreciated.
And yes, we did confirm space pianos. Well, we already had them. There's one
We had
that's
them.
in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
Why do you think we made the space piano? The heart will exist so we can drop it on Antoine.
Put it on
Foreshadowing.
a candidate. Yeah.
If you
That's-
fools vote
We
for
play
it.
the long game. You know us.
All right. So for Dave, for Adam, for Will, I'm Jared. Thanks for joining us this week on our Star Citizen Live, the story behind the universe. Take care, and we'll see you next week, everybody.
Well.
Bye.